Welcome to our annual Kristallnacht remembrance. Okay, my purpose tonight is really to explain for those of you who don't know why Rabbi Ain can't be here tonight. She's very sorry she can't be here, but her grandmother passed away this week, and she is with her mother in Washington, D.C., in the D.C. area, as they sit Shiva for her grandmother, who died peacefully in her sleep at 97 years old. So she had a blessed life, and may her memory be a blessing to her family, as I believe it is. So I want to start the evening and introduce our own Anita Kaminer, who is the, Anita Kaminer? She's in Japan. Anita Horowitz, who is our chair of Kristallnacht, and more importantly, the daughter of survivors of the Holocaust. And Anita, thank you.
Thank you, Shari. Can you hear me? Okay, oh, still louder. All right. The goal of Sutton Place Synagogue's Kristallnacht program is to illuminate personal stories with the hope of ensuring that November 9th, 1938, the night of broken glass and shattered lives, will never be forgotten. As unthinkable as it may be, 81 years after that infamous date, shameless acts of hatred and bigotry and flagrant incidents of violence are on the rise the world over. We believe the only hope for putting an end to such heartlessness is for moral, ethical, compassionate members of society to band together. To this end, in the spirit of interfaith unity and respect, Rabbi Ain and Sutton Place Synagogue have partnered with two neighboring faith community leaders and their congregations for tonight's event. Together, we will pay homage to the past as we continue our mutual pursuit for a peace-loving future for all. At this time, it is my privilege to introduce the Reverend Dr. Stephen P. Bauman, Senior Minister, Principal Preacher, and the Worship Leader of Christ Church, United Methodist, New York, and the Reverend Brenda G. Husson, Rector of St. James Episcopal Church. Reverend Husson began her tenure at St. James 16th Rector on November 1st, 1996, and her appointment made her the first woman to lead a congregation of such prominence in the Diocese of New York. The Reverend Dr. Stephen Bauman has guided the revitalization and growth of Christ Church since 1987. As senior minister and head of staff, he focuses his energy on strategic visioning, growth, and leadership development. A graduate of Occidental College and Yale University, he earned a PhD in leadership and change at Antioch University. Reverend Bauman.
Good evening. It's a real pleasure to be back here. It was about a year ago when both Brenda and I were here as members of a partnership of faith in New York City, the consortium of senior religious leaders of Abrahamic traditions came and assembled here as we grieved the terror at Tree of Life Synagogue. And this place was filled to overflowing with many of our congregants and many of your congregants, and we wept together, as I recall, and it was a powerful moment of community engagement and partnership and mutual support. And it's a pleasure to be back on this occasion as well, because we're continuing the important conversation that must be ongoing, especially in these very, very difficult days in our nation that are highly complicated, are they not, in which there are many divisions among us, and many of those divisions erupt into terroristic behaviors. We must stay vigilant, open, and hopeful about what's possible in the future. And that brings me to introduce you to Marty Brownstein, because his story is a story of hope in the midst of tragedy. He says, amidst the horrific tragedy of the Holocaust, I didn't know there was anything positive, is a statement that is often made to him. He's often heard it from readers and audiences about his inspirational story of courage, compassion, and rescue. Marty is a storyteller and the author of Two Among the Righteous Few, a story of courage in the Holocaust. It's a true story of two Dutch Christian rescuers in the Holocaust, a story with lessons and values for our times today. And I know that he was here earlier in New York, and Amanda Sturr, who is the senior pastor of St. Peter's Lutheran Church, another good friend of Brenda's and mine and Rachel's, had contacted me and said, Marty is really worth having. He's an inspiring, inspirational speaker. And I know we have spoken. I'm glad for this opportunity to meet you and to hear you tonight. Marty's home base is in the San Francisco Bay Area. His unexpected journey with his story is now into the 9th year, and it's taken him into 15 metropolitan areas around the country beyond his home. He is back in the New York area for speaking engagements for the 6th time along this journey. Because of his work with this story over the years, Marty recently received the Jefferson Award from an organization called Multiplying Good, which recognizes those who perform acts of public service and good in America. Good for you. Thank you for your good work. He also has a meaningful personal connection to this interfaith story that he will reveal in his engaging manner tonight. And at the conclusion of the program, his book will be available for purchase and signing. And I understand it's coming to us at a bargain. So good for you. Thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Marty, welcome. And
Thank you.
Glad to hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Good. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Let me try that again. Good evening, everyone. Because get ready tonight. I'm going to take you on a journey into a remarkable story. And to start this journey, I want you to be thinking about 3 questions. So question number 1, would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger? Think about that for a moment. That's actually a tough question. Question 2, would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger, knowing if you get involved, you probably put your life in great danger? Would you still help? And question 3, would you be willing to help others whose lives are in great danger, knowing if you get involved, you probably put your life in great danger, when these people who most need the help, most everybody else wants to hate them or be indifferent to their plight? Would you still get involved and help? And as you see the book title here, Two Among the Righteous Few, a story of courage in the Holocaust, is a true story of a Christian couple that answered a definite yes to all 3 of those questions in a time period when most everybody else said no. But I always say to give this book its just due, I should say its title is this: Twee tussen de rechtvaardige enkelen, een verhaal van moed in de Holocaust. That's the title of this book translated into Dutch. For the story takes place in the Netherlands, commonly referred to as Holland, during World War II and the Holocaust. And this couple, we'll go to the next slide, please, to let me introduce you to them. It's just a young married couple named Franz and Von Ocher. And in brief, who were they? Next slide, please. That's who they were. You see that top line? Nothing special about them. They were not well educated. They had no great success in business or any other venture in life. And in fact, if you went in the Netherlands today, went into any Dutch city, went up to any Dutch citizen in those cities and asked them this question: what can you tell me about Franz and Von Ocher? Here's what most would say in response: well, I don't know who they are. But you see that second line. At one time in their life, they did something so extraordinary, it teaches us lessons for our lives today. which is what's kept me going on this journey with this story. And as we go to the next slide to see them again, tonight in my storytelling presentation, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to paint a little bit of the historical picture in which this story takes place. We'll touch a little bit about World War II and a little bit about the Holocaust, and in particular about life in the Netherlands during World War II when it was under Nazi Germany occupation, the worst of all the countries in Western Europe. That picture I'll paint first will help you understand when I talk about who they were and what they end up doing that later will earn them a heroic honor. You're going to see how remarkable and unusual that was. And the last thing that I'm going to cover in my presentation, as you heard in the introduction, I also have a very meaningful personal connection to the story, which I always save for last, and then we'll be happy to take a few minutes of questions and then come visit with us afterwards. But a quick pause before I get into this. This was a story I actually stumbled into by accident on a trip to the Netherlands with my wife over 10 years ago. Then I was very involved in this management consulting business then and never would have expected I'd end up writing a book about this couple. But now it has sent me on this unexpected journey that is now well into its 9th year. And people have become supporters along the way that has helped me with this journey, which again, big thanks tonight, and you were already explaining how I got here, but a big thanks to the people behind this program tonight, both Reverend Brenda, Reverend Stephen, thank you very much for this, Rabbi Ain, who would have been here, and thank you, Sherry, for helping out here, and the people I've been working with here. Thank you, Anita, and Harriet Janover from the synagogue. Wave so everyone can see you. Please give them a hand for this. Some of you may become future supporters. Then we have a list, and people have often done, and they're the ones that keep my journey going, because audiences keep telling me, you have to keep telling this inspirational story, even more so in the divisive times that we are living in sometimes today. And my wife always says, make sure you tell them what you've done to our lives with this. I am now into my 9th year. Tonight marks event number 718. Yes, authors don't do that. I'm more than an author now that's trying to promote a story. People say, thank you for this, and I get to be the humble messenger for these two heroes. So now I'm going to get you into the story. I'm going to throw out a few questions to see what you know about your history. Guesses are welcome. Don't worry whether it's right or not. Throw out your guess. See Harriet for prizes afterwards if you are correct. So I said the story takes place during World War II in Europe. When does World War II in Europe begin and where? 1939. What month? Well, yeah, that's my later question. September of 39, September 1st of 39. What country does it start? Poland. And a certain country invaded Poland on that date, September 1st of 1939. What country? All right. 2 days later, the other powers of Europe at that time, Great Britain and France, declared war against Germany because of that invasion. And World War II breaks out. And the Poles were excited. Yay! The British and French are going to help us against those nasty Germans. And they didn't. Before September's out, Poland has fallen. And the war stopped for a period of time. In fact, if you looked at newspaper headlines around the world over the next 6+ months, a headline you would sometimes see was this: phony war. This war must not be real. Because Britain and France said they're going to attack Germany because of that invasion, and they sat there. Well, the war will not stay quiet with just a few countries involved. By spring of 1940, it starts erupting in Europe, and it keeps erupting and erupting, and finally ends in Europe when? 1945 is correct. What month? May. Very good. August in 1945, when Japan and Asia surrendered, it was finally done worldwide. World War II. Still true today with all wars that came before it and all wars that have come since. When this one was over, this is the most destructive war in humankind's history by far. When it was finally over, you had over 60 countries commit troops into this awful war, billions of dollars of property damage worldwide, and over 50 million people died worldwide in this awful war, the most by far ever. And one of the things that we saw in World War II that was not quite as prevalent in wars before, way too common sense. More than half of that people dying in this war were civilians. So it was not just soldiers dying at a high rate. I'll throw you one exception to that. This particular country actually will commit lots of troops into the war, have over 400,000 of its soldiers die in action, but will not have civilian casualties. What country? That's right, it wasn't fought on our soil. But that's not true if you lived on the continent of Europe. Nearly 2/3 of the death and destruction in this awful war took place throughout the whole continent of Europe. For this 5+ year time period, for the average citizen in Europe. Your life was basically a nightmare trying to survive. And that's where Franz and me Von Ocher lived. You don't want to be there. Now, Holocaust, capital H, the event, actually got its beginnings before World War II broke out in September of '39. Its beginnings go all the way back to 1933. In what country does it start? Germany, that's right. And before the war breaks out, it's already spread into Austria and then into Czechoslovakia. And then when World War II broke out in September 1939, it spread throughout the whole continent of Europe into North Africa, and the Holocaust finally ends when? When does it end? 1945, what month? May. World War II in Europe ended, May 1945. Holocaust ended, May 1945, same time. Two separate events happening on simultaneous tracks. The Holocaust, this nation-sponsored, systematic and racist effort to persecute, isolate, and then mass murder millions of people on Adolf Hitler's list of so-called undesirables or inferiors. In the end, you're going to see over 11 million people murdered in the Holocaust. And of course, as most of you probably would know, number one target on the list was whom? 6 million out of that 11 million plus. That was nearly 2/3 of the European Jewish population that will not be alive by May of 1945. And if you're on that list, and Jews being the top of that list, your life is worse than a nightmare. It's doomed. And in most cases, you won't know in time. You're going to get captured and eventually murdered. But in the late 1930s, even before Kristallnacht happened in November of 1938, a refugee crisis started to break out in Europe. And if you were one of these refugees trying to get out of the countries, Jews and some others, who sensed this doom was coming, and you sought the help of any government during this time period, and there were many that could have helped these refugees in dire need. Here's a few that could have helped most of all. You've probably heard of these governments. The governments of Canada, Great Britain, the United States. How many governments are going to help these refugees in dire need? That's correct. Yeah, we're not going to see much from governments throughout this whole 12-year period. What you will see throughout all of Europe, let alone the world, is a handful of people who had the courage and compassion to say, this is wrong and I should try to help. This couple, Franz and Von Ocher, were among those, unfortunately, too few, but they cared. Now I'm going to go to the next slide and take you into their country, the Netherlands. And there's a picture of the country. Area-wise, it's not very big. You drive 3-4 hours in any direction, you've hit the whole country. Population-wise, it's densely populated. This is the most densely populated country in Europe today. 17 million people there now. Just prior to World War II, 9 million. How many people in this room have ever traveled to the Netherlands? Wow, you guys get around, good audience, more than most. Other than once when I was at the Dutch consulate, then most of them had been there. I don't know if you have a little light thing, but the major city everyone goes to is Amsterdam there. There's the New York of Holland. And then the Rotterdam due south, second largest city. The capital city is The Hague there. So the major cities are in the west. For those who, again, who've traveled to the Netherlands, let me see your hands again. Did you get past the major city of Amsterdam in your travels? All right, a handful, yeah, because we all go there, but a handful. For those who have, I will come back to you later on for some geography assistance. But let me take you here now at the start of September 1939 when World War II breaks out. When that happened, the Dutch government said, oh, we want to be neutral. Let the big boys fight it out. Leave us out of it. They were neutral during World War I, and they were left out of it, so hoping for the same. By the way, there's a country to the south of the Netherlands, smaller in area, also densely populated, and it's called Belgium. They say, yeah, we want to be neutral too. Not going to be their choice. There's a major country on their eastern border. You just see a portion of it. It's called Germany. And they were making the decisions of who we're going to leave neutral and who not. It is now spring 1940 in Europe. The phony war period is now over, and the Germans are on a major offensive through northern and western Europe, with other parts to come a little bit later on. And poor little Holland was on the list. And in the wee hours of May 10th, 1940, German forces came over the eastern border of the Netherlands and they started attacking. The Dutch had this inkling that neutrality wasn't going to be honored, and they had troops in place, and they're putting up a pretty good fight, which the German commanders did not like and almost did not expect. But poor little Holland is pretty much going to be on its own because By the way, don't remind the French of this. Mighty France comes under attack at the same time and surrenders within 6 weeks. Poor little Holland, fighting on its own, ends up surrendering within 1 week. By the way, as I've been on this journey now, well into its 9th year, I've occasionally had some people in my audience, there were children in the Netherlands at this time. And when I just throw out that last kind of statement and they surrendered, they've yelled out, 5 days! They remember it was like just yesterday because the scars run deep. And while the Dutch were putting up a good fight, German commanders turned to the Dutch government and said, ultimatum, here's your choice. You either surrender now or we start bombing. And we're going to go after your major commercial industrial city, Rotterdam, first. So what are you going to do? So the prime minister talks it over with his cabinet and with the Queen, Queen Wilhelmina, and they turn to their commanding general and say, guess what, General Winkelmann? We don't want this destruction on our soil. Hurry up, negotiate surrender terms with the Germans. By the way, the day before the official surrender was made, a ship is waiting for the government leaders and the royal family, takes them across the North Sea to a place called London, England, where they will be a government in exile for the rest of the war. Good luck, Dutch people. Boom, out they went. And the surrender was made with the Germans, who said, thank you very much. And then they said this, their term for it is, excuse us, we had miscommunication. They bombed Rotterdam to smithereens anyway. 1,000 people were instantly killed. 85,000 were now homeless, and this major industrial center was now wiped out. For those who've traveled to the Netherlands, did you go visit Rotterdam? Yeah, a few. It's not a commonplace tourists go to. It's a nice city today. It took many years to rebuild. The historic beauty of European cities like Amsterdam, The Hague, destroyed. And a new day just began in the Netherlands. The Germans will put their own man in charge as the ruling governor. Like Adolf Hitler, he was an Austrian Nazi. Surround himself with his henchmen to run the country. And that occupation and control of the Netherlands by the Nazi authorities will last 5 miserable years, the longest and worst of all the countries in Western Europe. And as we go to the next slide, we're going to take a look at what that occupation was like for the Dutch. And there were 4 main areas of emphasis of how the Germans ran this country. Let's go to the first, please. And it says control the flow of information, meaning the news that people receive. Much easier to do in the 1940s than it would be today in 2019. In the 1940s, there were 2 major sources of how people got their news. What were they? That's right, those 2, newspaper and radio. So what we see, TV is not there yet, coming soon. Internet, what the heck is that? Al Gore has not invented it yet. So what we start seeing, of course, is Nazi censorship takes over the newspapers. Their propaganda rules the day. And before 1940 was out, the Nazi authorities in the Netherlands issued this nationwide edict, don't listen to your radio. You can look at it, don't listen to it. Trying to shut the outside world off. And here's what's bothering the German authorities. As the war is going on, they think some Dutch are ignoring that order. And if you were, you start picking up secret broadcasts coming out of London. The BBC, Radio Orange. The Dutch government in exile set up its own radio station where even the Queen would broadcast at times. By mid-1943, if you were listening to those secret broadcasts, this is what you'd be hearing. A year and a half before, Germany's dominating the whole continent of Europe. Now they're starting to suffer defeats on the battlefield. They do not want people to know this. You don't want to give anybody hope. September 1943, the German authorities in the Netherlands issue this nationwide edict. All Dutch citizens, turn in your radios. And they'll even do raids on house to collect radios, but in most cases, when the order came, most citizens did this. And where do I turn it in? And they did. Franz Von Ocher, what did he do? He hid his radio. He never turned it in. Franz did not quite follow the rules like most other people. Keep that in mind. Now we'll go to a second emphasis of how they ran the country. And when it says exploit all resources, meaning this. Germany has this major war machine. They need to manufacture all the armaments and get all the food for their troops and people. And so they take materials and food from the countries they occupied, and the Netherlands was conveniently located right next door. They did not care about the effect on the Dutch economy. Tough, tough times. And here's what scared the Dutch most in terms of exploiting resources. People. The term for it was forced labor, meaning this. The Germans have a major labor shortage. They did not have enough able-bodied young men, let alone young women, around to do the jobs of this huge war machine. By the way, where were those people? Why aren't they there? That's right. Actually, 2 wars. The military one we call World War II, they had over 10 million involved. This other one we call today the Holocaust, again, over 1 million involved with many other countries helping. So how'd they make up for the labor shortage? They took people from the occupied countries, Netherlands was right next door, and said, you come work in Germany. Forced labor was the term. During the course of the war, 350,000 Dutch citizens went into forced labor, went to work in Germany. 30,000 did not come home alive when this was over. Some came home disabled. Once the Dutch figured out what this was, no thank you. That's not a job assignment I want. Not your choice if you are summoned. Later in the war, Franz Von Ocher received a summons. It's your turn to now come work in Germany. A major obstacle he has to try to overcome. Now, a third emphasis of how they ran the country was this: stamp out resistance in any form it shows. Well, when the Dutch got conquered, and the same thing would happen here, they weren't ready to resist initially anyway. But in time, you're going to start to see some resistant efforts. Underground newspapers, don't get caught. And even some protests and strikes. And there will be a handful of major protests and strikes by the Dutch during the course of the war. Don't get involved, because the German response, brutal. For instance, I take you to late April 1943. The Germans had announced that they're now going to go after former Dutch soldiers to go into forced labor. And those who deliver milk, and especially this major milk processing plant in eastern Netherlands, said, we're going to go out and strike to protest this. And here's how the Germans responded. Day 1 of the strike, they went into that factory, that milk processing plant, and they shot to death 80 people. Put their pictures up around the country, made sure that people would know this is what happens if you want to get involved in any kind of protest. Day 3, when it was finally over, 175 people had been shot to death. That's what happens if you start to get in resistance. In time, you're going to actually see a handful of resistance groups in the most dangerous activities like sabotage, hit and run. Please don't be in my neighborhood, because the Germans would take out reprisals on anybody and everybody in the way. For instance, February 1943, one of the high-ranking Dutch Nazi traitors helping the Germans run the country was stationed in the capital city of The Hague in the west. And his doorbell rings one night there in February of 43, and he opens it up. 2 Dutch resistance fighters from the communist group targeting this guy, boom, shot him dead. When the head of the SS operations in the Netherlands, his name was Hans Rauter, the most brutal and feared man in the country, when he got wind of this, he ordered 50 people rounded up and executed, and made sure the public would know this. And this was the start of a reign of terror that became commonplace throughout the Netherlands for the rest of 1943, all of 1944, until the country was fully liberated in May of 1945. And that's where Franz Von Ocher lived. This was not a place you wanted to be. But I said there were 4 main areas of emphasis of how they ran the country. I've covered the first 3. Now we'll go to number 4. And as you see there, this was their number 1 priority. And this is what it was. Persecute, isolate, and then deport to the death camps in Poland the entire Jewish population we can get our hands on. Now, the Jewish population in the Netherlands, prior to the occupation, was approximately 1.5% of the total population. Doesn't happen all at once. But before 1940 is out, early edicts that start to target the Jewish population begin. And here is one of the early ones. All Jews in the Netherlands, if you work in university positions like professors or in government jobs, you're now out of that job because you're a Jew. Well, only a handful of Dutch Jews had begun to get these more prominent roles. So they were out of a job, and that included the most prominent Jew in the country, was a man named Lodewijk Visser. And his job in the Netherlands was equivalent to the job that John Roberts has in our country today. What does John Roberts do? That's right, Chief Justice of the American Supreme Court. Lodewijk Visser had an equivalent role on the Dutch High Court. By the end of November 1940, he was now out of that job because he was a Jew. And his fellow justices, in response, said, That's correct. Nothing. You demonstrated it well. Green light, the Germans say. They won't care what we do to their Jews. Let's continue. And they do. And throughout all of 1941, edict after edict keeps coming out, targeting the Jewish population, that by the end of that year, here was the effect. The Jewish population now has been isolated and removed from the non-Jewish population. Going to school with non-Jews, can't do. You want to attend university, Jews are not allowed. You work in a place with non-Jews, you're now out of a job. You actually owned your own business, it's been taken away. You want to go out and enjoy social and recreational activities like anybody else, Jews are now prohibited. And as 1942 rolled around, a population shift began in the country. More than half the Jewish population already lived in the major city, Amsterdam. Those in other parts of the country, removed from their homes, placed into Amsterdam, into ghettos. By May of 1942, if you went out in public in Amsterdam as a Jew, they took the symbol of Judaism, the Star of David, and made it a yellow badge of humiliation you had to wear on your clothes, so we know you're a Jew. And by July 1942, the trains were cranking. And they were taking the Jewish population bit by bit from Amsterdam and shipping them off to Poland, to the death camps, primarily Auschwitz and Sobibor. Now, the Nazis were masters of propaganda. So the message they told the whole country, Jewish and non-Jewish alike, was this: we're sending the Jews to work camps in Germany. False. And to reinforce that propaganda was some of the early arrivals to the death camps, if they survived the train ride getting there. When they arrived, they had postcards filled out for them. All you had to do was sign your name. And this, in effect, was the message on the postcard. Dear friends and family, life at the camp, it's not so bad. Sure, you got to work, but that's not bad. And food's pretty decent. We look forward to seeing you soon. Then that goes back to the people waiting anxiously in Amsterdam. I guess I don't need to worry after all. And this just continues and continues. And by the end of September 1943, the entire Jewish population in the Netherlands that the Nazi authorities could get their hands on had been deported. But the Nazi authorities there had this inkling. I don't think we got them all. Now, if you're a Jew in the Netherlands at this time, most don't know what's going to happen. You just go where you're told. But some sense doom was coming. And if you wanted to do something about it, your best chance, go into hiding. But you're going to need help to do that. Would anybody help? Contrary to popular belief about the Dutch, let alone anywhere else in Europe, the answer to that question is not many. Take a guess what the vast majority of Dutch population is doing and trying to do during this period of oppression and brutality in their country. What are most trying to do? Yeah, you can't blame them. That was only over 96% of the population. I hope they don't call me to forced labor. I hope I can still take care of my family. I'm not going to worry about anybody else. Now, among some of those Dutch, they felt sympathy to their fellow Jews. Because they noticed they go away and they don't come back. But if you rang their doorbell and said, please help, they won't open their door. How come? They were scared. Because if the authorities find out you're actually helping people we're after, especially Jews, and they find out that's about what you've been doing, guess where you got to go? The concentration camps with the Jews as well, where death waits you sooner or later. In Poland, we generally executed you on the spot and hung you in the neighborhood. So, fear is going to keep away even many who had even thought about, do I want to help? No way, no way. Well, among the Dutch who played an active role in this war, a little over 2% of the population, you can put them in two groups. If you see my hands here, the one on the left means that's more in number than the one on the right. The one on the right, resistance. I'll save them for a second. The one on the left, the sympathizers and helpers to the Nazis. One thing that often gets overlooked, as Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party went conquering throughout all of Europe, they had a lot of help in every country they went into from the local populations, including in the Netherlands. In fact, in the 1930s, through much of Europe, these little fascist or Nazi-like parties started springing up. There was one here in the United States as well in the 1930s. And the one in the Netherlands was known by its initials NSB. And prior to the war, a few thousand, and most of the Dutch looked at them as extremist idiots. Ignore those NSBers. They're harmless. Now we're a year into the German occupation of the country. 100,000 people had signed up and joined the NSB. How come? They want to be on the winning team. The Germans are dominating. Plus, you got good jobs. You got to help run the government. Even if you weren't qualified, loyal, good enough. And you didn't get sent off to forced labor. You ate better than the rest of the population. It was good opportunity. Sometimes you had to worry as much about your fellow Dutch as you did about the Germans running the country. Well, this other group, less in number than the helpers and the sympathizers, well, the resistance. Well, here were some challenges for the Dutch in their resistance efforts, which was not unique to them. In time, about a half dozen core resistance groups got organized, and for most of the war, they remained independent of one another, not unified. None of them ever had the firepower or manpower to ever match the Germans. And they had an extra disadvantage in the Netherlands, geographically speaking. See, in other parts of Europe, Eastern Europe in particular, you did a hit-and-run attack, you go deep into the forest, up the big mountain range. Hard to find you in there. All right, some of you who said you've been to the Netherlands and got past Amsterdam, let me see your hands again. There you go. How many big mountain ranges and deep forests did you find? That's right. It's a relatively flat country, a little hilly in the south. Lots of water. The Dutch are the best water civil engineers in the world. They've learned over the years how to control that water, otherwise half their country would be flooded. So if you could hold your breath underwater a long time in the resistance, you'll do just fine. So what's happened to many of these core resistance members? They're getting arrested, imprisoned, deported to concentration camps, even executed. Many of them had to go into hiding too. Very tough, dangerous work. Of all the resistance groups in the Netherlands, the one that became the largest and most effective was known by its initials, LO. Full name in Dutch, Landelijke Organisatie voor Hulp aan Onderdrukers. English translation, the National Organization for Helping People in Hiding. During the course of the war, the LO will help hide from the German authorities 300,000 people. Quite effective. Little side note to this. Very unusual for the time period of the 1940s. One of the founders and leaders of the LO was a woman. But how dangerous this work was. Later in the war, she got betrayed, sent off to a concentration camp in Germany, where she dies before the war is out. Very dangerous work. Well, by the time the LO had this network operating around the country, mid-1943, it was too late to help many of the Jews. At best, about 25,000 Jews make it into hiding. But the problem is, they were the #1 target, and the Nazis paid bounties if people ratted others out, especially Jews. So over a third of those Jews will be caught and deported. So those non-Jews willing to get involved in this risky, dangerous business, helping hide people from the German authorities, you had far more non-Jews willing to help hide non-Jews. Helping hide a Jew, I don't know if I want to go that far. Franz and Von Ocher, they went that far. Now I'm going to tell you about them. We'll go to the next slide. And I want to do a little big picture view first. And I want you to understand the meaning of the book's title, Two Among the Righteous Few. And the key word is the word righteous. And it comes from a place called, next slide please, Yad Vashem. In many audiences I speak on this, which is a wide variety of different kinds of places, the vast majority, very few have even heard of the place. This audience, when I ask if anyone heard it, I'm going to change my question tonight. I'm going to ask it this way. How many of you in this audience have been to this place? I thought so. And for those who haven't, or those who've been, I'll let you help the others. Tell them where it is and what it is. Yeah, in Jerusalem, Israel. And what is it? Yes, Holocaust Memorial Museum, educational place. The first of its kind when it was started in 1953, not long after the Holocaust and war are over. The word's not in the English language yet for a number of years. But the Israeli government passed a law that created this museum so the Holocaust would not be forgotten. I've been there 3 times myself over the years, and what's always stood out to me beyond its contents, which are very educational and very moving, is who comes to visit. This museum is crowded every day. People from around the world come to Yad Vashem every day, not just people who live in Israel. Well, one of the functions of Yad Vashem, and we'll go to the next slide, is this. It's called Righteous Among the Nations. They even have a department that focuses in on this. And this is actually an honor. This is an honor that goes to the non-Jews who during the course of the Holocaust risked their own lives to try to help save the lives of Jews. You notice the title of the book is not Two Among the Righteous, Many. Two Among the Righteous, Few. It was not a lot who did this. Probably the name, even if you weren't familiar with the term righteous or righteous among the nations, that most of you would know thanks to the movies. 1993, this movie directed by Steven Spielberg won the Academy Award titled, in honor of Oskar Schindler. They left out his wife, but she also with him in 1993 are recognized as righteous among the nations. And in this museum, go walk the grounds. Unlike most any kind of museum, it's not just what's inside the walls to see. Go walk the grounds. And if you do, you're going to see the plaques and trees planted for people who've gotten this very heroic honor of righteous among the nations. They refer to that as the Avenue of the Righteous. Next slide, please. And there's the one to Franz and Hermina. Hermina, her full name, mean for short, and she wasn't. Franz and Hermina Von Ocher, in simple terms for people, those are two Oskar Schindlers. This honor actually came 10 years before his did. This comes in fall of 1983 for them. Now, when it actually came, Meen, the wife, had already passed away. She died in 1980, so never knew about it. Franz, the husband, was still alive to receive the honor, and he lived to 1994, almost the age of 86. So as we go to the next slide, I'm going to take you back into their country and talk about who they were and what they end up doing that later will earn this heroic honor. And you see that red arrow pointing there in southeastern Netherlands. That's where they lived, in a countryside area. Their little town was called Dieden, where most of the country is cities, not their area. And life for them in this little countryside area, typical for most people there, was really three things that were important. One, by the way, let me see, how many parents do I have in the room? Parents. And grandparents is fine too, but the parent side, you were that first. If you're willing to admit it, of course. Take a look at this. One of the things that was important for them was raise a family. In fact, by the end of 1942, they already had 4 small children under the age of 5. Yes, that will make you cringe if you're a parent. And they wanted more kids, hoping to have a bigger family. Second, what was important in their lives was work hard. And they lived the traditional roles of the time period of the 1940s. Meen is the woman, you're supposed to run the household. Oh, she did. Franz is the husband, you work to support your family. He was a semi-skilled laborer. He worked at a grain mill one town over from Dieden. Were they well off? Not really. Was anybody in their area well off? Very few, but they got by. They could feed the family. And the last thing that was important for them in this area, be good Catholics. In other parts of the country, be good Protestants. In those days, in the 1940s, very different than 2019 today, regardless of what Christian faith you were, the role of the church was very influential in your life. And not surprising, in their area, who was the #1 authority figure that everyone revered? The local parish priest. And again, it would have been the Reverend Stephen. There wouldn't have been a Reverend Brenda in those days. And when that priest told you, you got to do this, you did it. And he says, don't do it, don't do it. And be at church every Sunday. So that was their lives. Pretty ordinary people. But they weren't. After the war broke out, Franz took a leave of absence from his job at the mill. And he thought he could make a little bit more money by getting meat and eggs from farmers in the countryside near where he lived. And then he would travel by train to the major cities in the West, like The Hague and Amsterdam, selling this scarce and valuable food to people in the cities. Cattle, much of it taken away to Germany, and chickens for eggs, much of it taken away to Germany. And here's this guy showing up, willing to sell people this food who were willing to pay for it under the table, as they call it. It's what you call a black market business, which means it's not. So don't get caught, because you will be thrown in jail. And Franz was a pretty good salesman doing it. Spring 1943. Franz was on one of his business trips in Amsterdam, calling upon this customer he's done business with before, who happened to be a doctor. And before he leaves the meeting with the doctor turns to him and says, would you be willing to help? And the doctor explains, you see, we got this young girl hiding here in the city of Amsterdam, and we'd love to get her out to the countryside where you live. What's your town again? Franz says, Dieden. Yeah, let's say you took her home to Dieden for 3 weeks. That way she could get a little better fresh air and a little better food. And, oh, by the way, she's Jewish. So would you be willing to help? And Franz went, okay. not exactly knowing what he's getting into, but he's a helpful guy. You've asked for his help, so sure. He's going to meet this young girl before the night is out. He only knows her by her false Dutch name, Freitje. You don't sneak somebody out of the cities during the days. Too many people around, they're going to rat you out, let alone police and the Nazi authorities. You go out late at night. Franz will sneak Freitje out of Amsterdam and finally get her home on the train to Dieden and arrive around midnight. There were no cell phones in those days, so when he was not home by supper time as he usually would have been, take a guess what his wife Mien was thinking and feeling. He got caught, he's sitting in jail, I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. And then he shows up around midnight with this young girl, and he says briefly to his wife, we're going to have this young girl stay with us for 3 weeks. And this was Mien's response. Well, it's late, let's get her to bed. Whew. He dodged a bullet there. And a new business has just begun for Franz and Mien Von Ocher. Let me tell you about Freitje. She was not Dutch. She was a German Jewish girl. And she and her family lived through the horrors of Kristallnacht in November of 1938. She got to see her father dragged out of their home and pulled into a concentration camp. About a month later, he was released as many others were because the German emphasis then in the 1930s, persecute and drive them out. So he had this order. It's your last chance to get your family out. Well, Freitje's one of 6. And he knows, he's hearing that the Dutch government was willing to take in just a few thousand. The term was called unaccompanied children, not families. By the end of the year, he's able to take his 6 siblings, and he tells them, we're going to go on holiday, although Mom didn't come. She's too distraught. And he's able to get them over the border into Holland, and they'll never see their parents again. But Freitje and her siblings get placed within the homes of Dutch Jewish families in Amsterdam, and life goes on. And they live close by to each other, so she can see them periodically. She learns Dutch right away. She goes to school. She makes new friends. In fact, one of the friends that she would play with sometimes, who was a girl who lived 1 block down, very popular girl. There was always lots of girls around her. German Jewish background too, but the family got out in the early 1930s when that had some possibility. But the problem for that girlfriend and her family and a few others like them who did get into hiding in Amsterdam is the chances of you surviving without getting betrayed pretty slim. They do get caught. This was a girl named Anne Frank. Freitje thankfully met a guy named Franz Von Ocher and got out of the city. Well, now she's been at the Von Ocher home for a week. And Mien comes to Franz one day and says this, you know, Franz, I've been talking with Freitje, and you know what I think I figured out? I think she's Jewish. Did you know that? Franz said, yeah, I knew. Well, she's got a younger brother still hiding in Amsterdam. Go get him. They're going to sneak him out, call him by his false name, Freitje. And a short time after that, through these 2 former teachers in Amsterdam, who through some acquaintances had heard about the Von Ochers in the countryside, and they come out on the train with a girl of 17 who happens to be Jewish, and they bring her to the Von Ocher home, and they say, Franz and me, yeah, we'll take her in too. Now there's 3 Jewish children refugees in their own home with their 4 small children. Do they recognize what they've gotten into? Probably not fully yet, but they're going to go forward, and here comes one of the early challenges. A woman who still has permission because she's part of the Jewish Council to travel comes out to the Von Ocher home short time after this. She knows sooner or later we're all going to get deported. And she tells Franz and Mien in this meeting, my husband and I have access secretly to money. And we can pay you well until this awful war is over if you would store us, was the term, which means take us in your home, keep us safe and in hiding. Well, Franz and Mien could really use this money. And they're about ready to close the deal when who comes from the back of the house into the living room? 2 little Von Ocher children. And who comes after to go get those little kids? Freitje and Freitje. She hears them talk. She hears the German accent. She sees their darker look. And right away she turns to Franz and Mien and says, those 2 children are Jewish, aren't they? Yes. You can't keep them here anymore. Children could do something out of innocence that would just cause danger here. Many other people will take children. You go send them away, and then my husband and I will come. Franz is nervous. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Mien rises up. No, the children are going to stay. If you and your husband wish to come, you may, but the children stay. This was one strong woman. you don't say no to her. And she will become the backbone of a rescue operation about to take off. The Jewish woman foolishly left, never to be seen again. Well, after this, a short time later, came the pivotal moment. A stranger shows up on Franz's doorstep one day and starts talking to him right away. And he only goes by this code name, Long John. And initially, as he's talking to Franz, he's making him very nervous, because this Long John fellow seems to know that Franz and Mien Von Ocher have 3 Jewish children refugees in their home. So Franz is wondering, how does this guy know this? Is he a spy? Is he with the police to arrest me? And then this Long John fellow says this, you could be of help to us. Who is this guy? He's with the LO, the resistance group that helps hide people from the German authorities. Likely the Dr. Quains in Amsterdam, also part of the LO, they've been talking. Weinochers seem helpful. Countryside, good location. Let's see if we can get more help. And now Long John starts to explain. And Mien has joined Franz for the conversation. And he tells them, we're trying to get the remaining Jews still hiding in the cities out before it's too late. And we'd love to get them out to the countryside where you live. Now, you can't fit them all in your own home. So here's what we'd like you to do if you're willing. We can give you money to fund an operation. And we'd like you to go around the little towns in your area and see if you can recruit people to take them in their home, and then you can pay them for it. Now, I don't want to kid you, he said. This would be risky, and this likely would be dangerous, but would you be willing to help? And Franz and Mien looked at each other and without hesitation went, okay. Not exactly knowing what they're signing up for, but they want to be helpful. And now they go forward, and this takes over their whole life, day in and day out. And Franz is now going recruiting to build this rescue network and getting word of people coming his way or to go in the cities and sneak them out. And he's pretty good persuasive salesman, getting people to take someone in. He'd often appeal, and the good Lord will look kindly upon you if you take someone in. And by the way, I can give you money in these hard times to help. And all the people he was placing in this rescue network, from children to adults of various ages, were all Jewish. Most knew it. Sooner or later they figured out if he didn't tell them. But as this picked up, so did the many challenges and dangers. And when I reflect back on the many challenges and dangers that Franz and Mien encountered, I am stunned that they actually continued. Most people would have said, too difficult, too dangerous. I got 4 little children to worry about. Go away, no thanks. Well, among the many challenges and dangers they encountered, I'm just going to highlight 2 briefly, and there were many more. One, and this occurred with the rescue network periodically. Franz would get word from people, come to our house, Franz. And he'd hear the word betrayed come out. They'd say, Franz, this Jewish person we have here got exposed. That means word will soon travel to the authorities, which means not only they're going to come get this person, they're going to come get us. We've been betrayed. Get them out of here. And Franz could not convince those people to keep the Jewish individual any longer. Mad scramble, try to find another place. At the height of this, beyond this rescue network, Franz and Mien typically had 8 to 10 Jewish refugees in their own home as well with their 4 little children, one crowded place. And the second among many challenges and dangers they encountered, that I'll highlight briefly, deals with the first adults that Franz and Mien took in their own home after the 3 Jewish children. It was a young married couple, similar in age to them. And they're able, through the help of the LO, get snuck out of Amsterdam in the fall of 1943. The husband, his name was Lou. Neat thing about Lou, he was an architect. And he will design and work with Franz to build a hiding room in their home. When 1944 rolls around, German presence picked up in this area. Thank goodness for that hiding room. Well, Lou's wife, Angeline, when she's arrived at the Von Ocher home in the fall of 1943, she has a secret she cannot keep secret any longer. She's already pregnant. How do you get a baby born to a Jewish woman in Nazi-occupied Holland? The answer is impossible. In fact, for them, they're so busy in this rescue operation, why bother? Maybe send her away. Well, when this was finally over, this didn't just go on for 2 weeks or even 2 months. This went on for nearly 2 years. In the end, Franz and Mien Von Ocher will save the lives of over 24 Jews from certain death, and miraculously nobody got caught, And as we go to the next slide, you can see why they got that heroic honor of righteous among the nations. Now, the last thing I'm going to cover before I open up the floor to your questions deals with my own meaningful personal connection to this story. One I understand so much more today since I got involved with this story. So I'm going to read you a little excerpt from the book to give you insight, and let me set up this piece I'm about to read. As I've been on this journey now well into its 9th year, yes, event number 718 tonight, I've been fortunate to have a wonderful supporter with me along the way, and I brought her with me here tonight. It happens to be my wife, Leah Bars, and here she is. Yes, thank you. That helps me at home too, thank you. Well, it turns out that my wife, Leah, and her family are actually immigrants from the Netherlands themselves. They moved to the United States when she was near 14 years old to a place called Los Angeles. Much better weather than the Netherlands. She took to the beaches in there right away, goes on to high school, and then went on to college and graduated from a place called UCLA. Started a career in Los Angeles as a teacher, and after a few years, she moved to Northern California, to San Francisco, continued a fine career in education, the bulk of it as a school psychologist, happily retired today, as she reminds me of often, and raised 2 daughters along the way who are fine young women today. Later in life, she picked me up. And it has been over 12 and a half years, and she tells me that we are happily married, so I believe what I'm told. Well, I want to take you to May 2009. And at that point in my wife, Leah's life, it has been 25 years since she was last back to her original homeland. And there's nobody left, friends or family, that she knows, but a burning desire to go back to her homeland. And I had never been to the country before. So we go on this special trip for 6 weeks, traveling around the country, having a wonderful time. More than 2/3 of the way into it, we stumbled into something by accident that I thought was so significant. I end up writing a letter to her 2 daughters, Shoshana and Alana, and that's the piece I'm going to read to you now. One last thing before I do. If you knew my wife as a child in the Netherlands, less would you know her by her name Leah, much more you would know her by her Dutch nickname Ineke. So please keep that in mind. Chapter 1, Historic Moment. Dear Shoshana and Alana, today is Tuesday, May 26, 2009. I'm writing to share more than just travel stories from a wonderful journey your mom and I are having. I want to document something to you that I hope you'll find of much value for your own family history. Well, I know some of the history, and you probably do too. Coming in contact with the reality of it merges mind and heart into something of great significance. I will explain shortly. Being in the Netherlands, much more than in the United States, one is reminded of World War II and the Holocaust as well. When we started our trip in Amsterdam, we visited the Anne Frank House. It is a wonderful educational museum. Last Friday, we visited the museum and site of Camp Westerbork. Before World War II, there were 140,000 Jews who lived in the Netherlands. Over 75% perished during the Holocaust. Westerbork was the deportation center the Nazis used to ship the Dutch Jews off to the death camps in Poland. We arrived last evening in the city of Eindhoven in the south of the country. Of the places your mom's family lived prior to immigrating to the U.S., Eindhoven was where they were the longest. Before arriving there yesterday, we stopped in an old town named Brounstein. It is the big, small town in an area of villages in a southern section of the country. It is also near where your grandparents were hidden during the war. As we stop and walk around the charming 1600s historic downtown of Brounstein, all 2 blocks of it, we spot a tourist information office. We go in, and your mom asked the staff members about the location of, next slide please, it's an old vacant church here, about the location of an old church in the nearby small town of Dieden, and if the home that once belonged to us, Franz Von Ocher, is still next to it. For the older folks of this area, which the 3 office people on hand were, the name of Franz Von Ocher is a notable one. They tell your mom not only how to get to this church, but also that one of the Von Ocher sons still lives in this particular house. So off we go down the road to Dieden. About 10 minutes later, we find the church in question. We park our car there and walk over to the house next door. As we walk up the driveway, we see a few people sitting at a table in the front yard on this warm day, and we see, next slide please, and we see the word shalom written on the front side of the house, probably a foot in size. Your mom boldly walks up to the gentleman sitting there and says in Dutch, "Hello, I'm Ineke Bars." A roar goes up along with a warm handshake. This man and his wife sitting with him know who Ineke Bars is and much more of the significance related to her. In the next few minutes, the Dutch starts flying and phone calls start happening. Within 10 minutes, his youngest sibling, Irene, drives over and joins in the lively discussion, which, by the way, was all in Dutch, so I could only watch. The man who has greeted us is Franz Von Ocher Jr. He is the youngest son of the aforementioned Franz Von Ocher. His father, Franz, with the support of his mother, Meen, saved your grandparents and your mom, baby Ineke, during World War II. They all survived the Holocaust because this Catholic man and his wife hid them and other Jews and helped even more hide from the Nazis. Do you recognize the significance of this moment? Franz, the son, and his wife, also named Irene, visited Israel themselves last year. They showed us a blown-up picture of the memorial plaque and tree planted in Yad Vashem's Avenue of the Righteous section in honor of their parents, which is when the historic significance of what I was witnessing really hit me. Well, after visiting for over an hour, they've invited us to come back Wednesday evening. They have 3 other siblings who are all alive and living in the local area, so your mom will likely meet more of the Von Ocher family who she last saw 25 years ago. Thank you for the oohs and ahs. And now we'll take a few minutes for some questions here. We have a microphone. Oh, yes, thank you, thank you. We had a microphone for audience questions somewhere? All right, Hunter has it, okay. And Hunter, if you can come on over here. I'm going to start things off, and this nice gentleman, do you need glasses? You can read without glasses. You got them. All right, you're prepared. All right, what is your name?
My name is Ed Brounstein.
All right, Ed. Ed's going to start us off. He's ready.
So what happened when you came back for that visit with the family that Wednesday?
Good question, Ed. Thank you, thank you. All right, good place to start. I just finished reading this piece, and they've invited us to come back Wednesday evening. I always like to answer it and put it in the context of people's lives here today, because we have busy lives. You know, and we had shown up unexpectedly. And let's say you had a brother or sister in the area one night, and you gave them a call. And you said, so-and-so just came into town. You remember her? It's like 25 years ago we last saw her. Yeah, I remember her. She's here with her husband, fine. Could you come over tomorrow night to visit with them? Here's the answer. So many people I know, it would go like this. Oh, I wish I could. But I have this happening at work or with the kids or the grandchildren and all other things going on. Sorry, send them my regards. Well, when the Von Ocher siblings, and now there's 5, the youngest, Irene, was born after the war, when they heard Ineke Bars was in town, please show the last slide, all 5 came that evening. It was a very special, happy reunion, one of the pictures we have in the book. I'll introduce you to the family in a moment. But I'm going to tell you what was also unique for me about this evening. For those who traveled in the Netherlands, you know, vast majority of Dutch speak multiple languages, especially English. Very easy country for Americans to travel in. They, in this picture, are in their 60s, early 70s, who grew up in the countryside, do not speak much English, and I speak even less Dutch. We were there for 3 hours that night, and the whole conversation was in Dutch, and I did not feel out of place. My wife, who can still speak Dutch, would translate things for me, ask questions on my behalf, but I could see this is something very special going on here. Let me introduce you to the family. Later, when I go back to build the story about their parents, the one on the far right, the oldest, became my point person to help. Her name is Nellie. And we've had this happen, my wife and I, since. 3 other times we've come back to travels in the Netherlands, and now that there's a reconnection, when Nellie heard we're coming into the country those 3 other times, she said, make sure you stay with us too. So we spent more time with her and her brothers and sisters and met some of her children and grandchildren. Right now, and she actually looks no different, Nellie not long ago turned 81, and she's 81. I think in this audience somebody would understand when I say 81 going on 50. This lady is so full of energy, good luck if you can keep up with her. Between her and my wife is the youngest of the 3 brothers, Franz Von Ocher Jr., who lives in the actual house where his parents' rescue activity took place. It was a rental then. He now owns it today. So it's been remodeled, but it's the same place. And after my wife is the youngest born after the war, Irene, and the other 2 brothers, Jan and Thijs, who supported me doing this book about their parents, who they're very proud of. So thank you for your question. What else can I answer here for a few minutes before we wrap this up? Yes?
You mentioned that the Dutch Supreme Court really said nothing.
Right.
They said nothing about the chief being
Taken away,
taken away because he was Jewish. Should
Yes.
Jews today be concerned that certain government officials in this country have said nasty things about Jewish people, and certain people have said nothing? We talk about government officials.
Yes,
Would
yes.
that be a concern?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. You know, all the more important what I hear. I mean, you're raising a question that I hear sometimes from audiences, the concerns with this divisive time sometimes we see here. All the more important people tell me that we need stories to be reminded of the good in people and people hopefully speaking out when the wrong things are happening. We definitely need that. Thank you for that. What else can I answer here before we soon move it to closure?
Has the family ever been visited by any other survivors, people that they saved during the war?
Yes, a handful over the years. Now, when I go to build this story here, and Nellie being my point person to help, I asked her, well, who's left that your parents helped that I could have a chance to connect with? And she said, as far as I know, none of them are alive anymore. If they are, we've lost touch with them, so I couldn't help you there. But I don't think any of them are alive, except for Freitje. Who's Freitje? The very first one they took in. Her real name today, married name, she was Shula Lob as a child, Shula Schwartz. Some serendipity went on. This piece I read is full of serendipity to, after this long distance interview with Nellie, we already had a trip booked to a country called Israel. And we got Shula's address because she lives in a place called Haifa, Israel. And we, in late April 2010, got to meet her in person. What a wonderful lady. We've been back a couple of times since this year. She was also very instrumental in helping put this story, because as a teen, boy, did she have memories that she had never talked about before. We were last in Israel this past May. We made sure we went to Haifa, Israel, and we handed Shula Schwartz a birthday card for her 91st birthday. Thank goodness she met a guy named Franz Von Ocher and his wife, Meen. Otherwise, she would not be here today. She's had a wonderful life. 3 children, 14 grandchildren, now 7 great-grandchildren. A 50-year marriage, unfortunately a widow, but this lady, I would take her home as my mother if I could tomorrow. She's that special. So thank you for your good question.
Have the Jews returned to Holland?
Not in large numbers. Today, Jewish population in Holland is estimated 40,000. It was 140,000 prior to the occupation. Amsterdam in those days, prior to the occupation, was the New York of Holland. 10% of the population was Jewish. It was all over, whether they're religious or just cultural. I mean, it was just common life. It's destroyed through this. So that population is less. People have moved on over the years, so it doesn't have the same impact anymore. But there are a small number there. Yes?
You said something that life before the war religion was very important. You went to
For the Christians, especially for the Christians.
church on Sunday.
Yes.
What was the attitude of the church in trying to save people?
We'll go with the Catholic Church in particular. Ah, yes, great question.
Not necessarily just the Catholic.
Yeah, yes, and certainly there were different Protestant. Dutch Reformed Church, the largest Protestant. And the answer to that question is mixed. Some don't do anything. Some don't want to do anything. In fact, don't even care that things are happening. And others do try to help. During the course of the war, 90-plus clergy in the Netherlands themselves who either spoke out or did something to try to help were captured and killed. The major cleric on the Catholic side, an archbishop there, Johannes de Jong, will speak out on occasion, and then the Germans right after, in retribution, went after anybody who was Catholic with potential Jewish heritage and rounded them up and deported them. So, they were very intimidating. Now, there's a kind of a follow-up question to yours that I sometimes get asked that's kind of implied in yours. Let's go to the Von Ocher area. So the question there would be, what about their church, their priest, Father Johannes Simons, the local parish priest, right there. I'm going to play the game Jeopardy. You know how Jeopardy works? Here's the answer. You give me the question. So the answer is, He was one of the biggest thorns in the local area to the rescue activity of Franz and Von Ocher. And the question is, who was? The parish priest. Because he's the number one authority figure. He's in tune with all the gossip going on. And when he starts hearing word that those Von Ochers might be involved in helping save Jews, he confronts Franz. You do not lie to the parish priest. Franz will admit, yes. How can you be doing this? He is so upset. Good news. He never betrayed them. The Germans never took him and interrogated him. He might have there. But this is going to be one of the obstacles they have to overcome. He's not going to be a help. He's more of a hindrance, but at least they were able to work around it. Thank you for your question. We'll take another one here. I wanted that young person. Can you stay one more minute? I needed a young person for something. There weren't many of you in tonight. You know, under 20 even. Under 30, I think, in this group would be a young person. Go ahead with your question, though. Yeah, come on back in if you can.
Given the situation today, has the reemergence of anti-Semitism in Europe appeared in Holland?
To a small degree, yes. They've had incidents there as well. And so they've not been immune to it. And so it is a concern. You know, worse maybe in places like France, Belgium, but it is a concern throughout Europe.
Has there been any recognition by the Dutch government of the efforts of this couple?
No. They would not be known to the Dutch government. There's been, I know with one of the righteous, who was Dutch heritage, they did some recognition some years ago, because he was also involved helping with the government after the war and some army. So John Widener is his name in terms of he became an American later. But most of this, they've never really paid a lot of attention to. Good question. Any other questions before we do a final one? Good. You might have to take the part of the young person for my final question.
I'm wondering if the children of the Von Ocher couple, in addition to being proud of their parents,
yes,
if the actions that their parents took and the risks that they took to save, you know, these vulnerable people in their midst, had an effect on how they lived their lives and maybe on that, like their children's lives and so on. Did they make any similar commitments towards, you know, justice or protecting people in their own lives?
Yes, and I can speak to Nellie and Irene, the two sisters, the most. A big part, and I've met 4 of Nellie's 5 children, but they didn't grow up with just 4 or 5, 5 kids in the house. They grew up with foster children. Nellie spent many years taking in foster children and helping raise them. Irene has done the same thing. That was their way to kind of do service and give back. I think the others have done various volunteer things at times. So they just believe in that helping others is a normal thing you do. So it did set an example for them. Thank you for your good question. Any other final questions before we wrap this up? Back to Ed.
Have you ever visited Auschwitz or Dachau?
No.
No, you haven't?
Have not been to those concentration camps. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you what your emotional reaction was.
I've known enough people to know that, yeah, you don't, unless you're heartless, it's going to have quite a reaction. Yeah, definitely. All right, we'll go to the final question. Any others? Okay, why don't I always make this our final one? Oh, wait a minute, one more. Oh, wait a minute, 2 more there, okay.
How do you find the young people finding these stories about the righteous?
Great question. One of the things I do, and I did it in 2 places on this New York series. I did 4 public storytelling events and 2 events inside schools. And I'm inside schools with the book all the time, back in the Bay Area in particular, where I even have, it's always been the right teacher, who has the students even read the book, and I come lead discussion. Oh, so rich. And I was in a couple places out here. They love it. In fact, one of the things that we hear, and it was mentioned in the introduction from sometimes, especially from students, although I hear it from adults too, amidst the horrific tragedy of the Holocaust, I didn't know there was anything positive. Yours brings the positive. Yours brings lessons for our lives today. So we hear very positive reaction. I've been, in a way, a myth buster on this journey, because more of my audiences are non-Jewish. More of the places I go to have nothing to do with faith, even though I go to many of those. Because this story resonates for people, and you're even talking about the times today. I've been told more in the last 3 years. In fact, this is a quick little story. Summer 2016, I was at a church in Chicago doing a little speaking series there, and the pastor, my host that evening, says to the audience before he brings me up, it ties to your comment earlier, and of course we're in the midst of the presidential election. We don't know the outcome, we know the contenders, and he says, you may share in the concerns that I do, that we see this growing divisiveness and polarization in our country today, let alone growing extremism around the world, we need to be reminded of the good in people and the positive values we should have. Our speaker tonight's going to bring you such a story. And when I'm in schools, that comes out. And we really do a lot of what lessons can you apply from this story to make a difference, because they set examples of character that's good for kids of all ages. Thank you for your question. We had one more out there. Now we'll go to our final question. Keep that microphone with that gentleman there. What is your name? Sid. Even if you're not as young as I wish, it's okay. Give Sid back the microphone. He'll ask the question that's related. With the microphone, there you go.
So whatever happened with that baby?
All right, there you go. So Sid was seeking the answer before we had the question. So, and obviously you picked up, you're referring to that young Jewish couple where the wife's already pregnant. Uh-huh, whatever happened? Glad you asked, glad you asked. All right, well, so all right, you were making a guess, Sid, what do you think is the answer? Ah, good guess, good guess. Anyone else want to make a guess before I tell you? People often guess that. What's that? It's my mother. Yes. Actually, she was Canadian, so she wasn't there in Holland at the time. She was in Canada at the time, Saskatchewan, where it's cold, cold, cold in the winter. Here's the short answer. Chapter 11, it explains the whole thing. Could leave it at that. And do come up and visit with us afterwards, whether you want to get a book or not, but please come up. And I understand why you said what you did, Sid, because it does throw people. You know whatever happened? I married that baby, and here, I brought her with me here tonight. Here she is. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful audience. When I say I have a very meaningful personal connection to this story, folks, it doesn't get any more meaningful and personal than that. Yes, she looks too young to be that baby, but she is. When I stumbled into this story in this accidental visit, I understand the depth of this so much more today. Now, interesting enough, my wife and I met now almost 18 and a half years ago, and she told me something in one of our early get-togethers she never told anybody. She told me about her beginnings. And then I learned about her parents, of course, being Holocaust survivors. Her father, one of three, he had two brothers, the only one that survived. Her mother, one of five, the only one that survived. She did not get the good opportunity to grow up with extended family, cousins and aunts and uncles. But as I mentioned, since we got connected for me into this story, I understand the depth of this so much more today. Because their parents did something very unusual and special. And in fact, just a little quick add to that, if I may, when we had a subsequent visit, now that we're reconnected with the Von Ocher family, she just brings me along. Nellie there on the far right, after we stayed with her for 3 days, and we're getting ready to leave, this is when you know you had a good visit. She says to me, in the little bit of English she can speak, she says, "When are you coming back?" And then with tears in her eyes, she hugs my wife very closely and says in Dutch, "Dag, mijn oorlogzuster." Goodbye, my war sister. She's a reminder to them of how proud they are of their parents, because their parents performed a miracle. And they got this baby born, and they kept her and her parents safe and together until liberation finally came. And I always say, thank God for the courage and compassion of Franz and Von Ocher. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that extraordinary gift of your story, and I hope that people will, in fact, stay for a little bit, both to purchase books and continue the conversation. Just a couple of last words, last thoughts. In our National Archives building is inscribed one of Shakespeare's great lines from his play, The Tempest, and it is that the past is prologue. And it's inscribed there as a reminder that we must know the past in order to understand and shape a better future, and that is a very good reason to have that inscription. But the truth is, I know that when I hear Shakespeare's famous line now, and perhaps some of you have that same experience, it suggests to me that the past too often seems like it is coming back around. The swastikas, the chants of blood and soil, the desecration of cemeteries and synagogues. We have been here before, and we must not let what's going on now in our country and around the world become the prologue to further hate, further discrimination, further anti-Semitism. And so I want to suggest at the close of this night another phrase. Its origin is less clear. I've heard it attributed to a number of people. But I hope as you hear it, if it's new to you, you will lay hold of it so that we can inscribe it in our hearts and in our actions. It is this: love lived out in public is justice. Love lived out in public is justice. We can never return hate for hate, but we must insist on justice. All of us together, for all of us together. So thank you, Marty, for your extraordinary story and for the gift of the marriage that led you to that extraordinary story. And let's spend some time together over with Marty and his wife. Thank you for coming.